He came to the park to disappear a 45-year-old man with a weathered leather coat-haunted eyes and a past he never speaks of. His only companion was Ranger, a retired German shepherd who once saved lives beneath fallen buildings, and saved Ethan's soul after tragedy stole everything else. But when 3 wealthy teens targeted him for fun, mocking him, tearing his sketchbook and kicking Ranger to the ground, something far darker surfaced. Because when the deputy arrived, he discovered the truth behind the man, and the hero lying shattered at his feet. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. A pale winter sun drifted over Colorado Springs, its cold light barely warming the frozen air that clung to the quiet city park. Ethan Cole sat alone on a weathered wooden bench near the lake, a spot he had chosen for its silence and distance from people. At 45, he carried the sort of presence that told strangers to keep their distance, not because he threatened them, but because something in him looked irreparably tired. He wore a thick, dark brown leather jacket dulled by years of use, the collar scratched and bent from long winters. Beneath it sat a red and navy flannel shirt that peeked out whenever the wind lifted the coat's edges. His jeans had faded into streaks of silver, and his boots, heavy, dark, sturdy, had scuffs along the toe from long walks, taken only to keep his mind from collapsing. A gray wool scarf wrapped loosely around his neck, brushing against the stubble that coated his jaw. His face was sharply cut, all angles, shadows, and memories. Lines dug deep around his mouth and brow, not from age, but from surviving things he never asked for. His hair, dark brown, long enough to graze his neck, held streaks of silver at the temples, like frost settled permanently into his body. And his eyes, a steely gray, seemed to hold a storm only he could see. For years he had slipped away from the world, avoiding neighbors, avoiding conversation, avoiding anything that resembled closeness. People whispered that he was strange, withdrawn, unpredictable. They never knew about the night he lost a teammate under falling concrete, or the guilt that pressed on his ribs every time he tried to sleep. They only saw the quiet man who lived alone on the edge of town. Ranger lay curled against his boots, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat thick enough to blend into the winter grass. His body was muscular posture, disciplined even in rest, and his ears twitched at every sound. Ranger had once been part of an urban search and rescue unit, trained to crawl through collapsed structures, find survivors under choking dust, and bark through chaos. He had medals for bravery, though Ethan never displayed them. To Ranger, heroism was not glory, it was loyalty. And Ethan was the last person he had sworn to protect. The dog lifted his head each time Ethan shifted the pencil in his hand. On a large sketchpad across his lap, Ethan traced the outlines of the lake, the skeletal trees, the thin glaze of ice hugging the water's edge. Drawing was the only act in his life that let him breathe without the weight of his memories crushing his lungs. But even now, as lines formed beneath his hand, the past pressed in. The smell of dust, the scream of metal, a teammate shouting his name before silence, swallowed it whole. Ethan blinked hard, his breath hitching, then forced his pencil farther down the page. Ranger nudged his knee gently, sensing the fracture in his calm. "I'm fine," Ethan murmured, though both of them knew he wasn't. The quiet was broken by the crunch of snow-patched grass. 3 teenagers approached Mason, Trent, and Cooper. All 3 were local boys from wealthy families who roamed the park like they owned it. Mason, the oldest at 16, wore an expensive down jacket and a smirk that never reached his eyes. His blonde hair was brushed to perfection, his sneakers spotless despite the mud. Trent, a shorter boy with a sharp chin and restless hands, followed closely behind. Cooper, the youngest, trailed with a nervous laugh, that often erupted before he understood the joke. They spotted Ethan whispered among themselves, then walked directly toward him. "Look who it is," Mason said loudly, as if announcing the arrival of a spectacle. "The Hermit of Willow Lane." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't even look up. His gray eyes stayed on the paper, but his jaw tensed. Trent circled him slowly. "Dude, he's actually drawing. What is it?" "A tree, a sad tree," Cooper snickered. "Maybe it's a self-portrait." The laughter stung, but only at the outer edges. Ethan had heard worse from people who mattered more. He stayed silent, pencil, steady breath controlled. Ranger stood. No bark, no growl, yet just a shift in posture. Tail low, muscles alert. Mason stepped closer, invading the fragile bubble of peace Ethan had created. "Hey, old man, you deaf or just rude?" Still, Ethan didn't answer. He knew words never worked with kids like this, kids who poked at things they didn't understand. Ranger's ears flattened. Ethan placed a steadying hand on the dog's back. Easy, but Mason wasn't done. He leaned forward, and with 2 fingers tapped the corner of Ethan's sketchbook. "What's this art therapy for losers?" Ethan's hand tightened around the pencil. Ranger let out a low rumble. Mason grinned. "Oh, look. The mutt's upset." Trent reached out faster than Ethan expected and snatched the sketchbook from his lap. Ethan stood the cold air slicing through his coat as he tried to grab it back. "Give it back," he said quietly, voice rough from disuse. Trent flipped through the pages. "Dude, these are actually good." Mason sneered. "Which makes it funnier." He ripped the sketchbook from Trent's hands and tossed it to the ground. Paper smacked against the dirt pages, bending sharply. Ranger barked short, sharp warning. The sound echoed across the empty park. Ethan froze, breath trapped somewhere between fear and fury. His fingers curled into fists, skin stretched white over his knuckles. "Back off," he said, voice still low, but laced with something darker. Mason stepped closer, chest puffed the cold, turning his breath into little puffs of arrogance. "Or what you'll draw us to death," Trent laughed. Cooper kicked snow at Ranger. The dog stepped in front of Ethan, body rigid, teeth barely visible beneath pulled lips. Mason shook his head, scoffing. "Stupid dog thinks he's guarding something important." He lifted his leg. Ethan shouted, "Don't!" But the warning came too late. Mason swung his foot with deliberate force, connecting directly with Ranger's ribs. The sound was sickening, a muted thud followed by a sharp gasp from the dog. Ranger collapsed onto his side, yelping a sound so raw it felt like it ripped something out of Ethan's chest. His vision blurred. His pulse roared in his ears. The world narrowed into a tunnel of cold panic and rising rage. And then everything went dark. The wind sliced across the park like a thin blade carrying with it the brittle sting of winter as Ethan Cole dropped to his knees beside Ranger's trembling body. The world around him seemed to blur not because of snow or wind, but because panic had wrapped itself around his throat like a fist. Ranger lay curled unnaturally on the cold ground, his ribcage rising and falling in sharp, painful jerks. His sable fur shifted with each desperate breath, and Ethan's hands, scarred cold and shaking, hovered above him before finally settling on the dog's neck. "Ranger, look at me," Ethan whispered, voice cracking like dry wood. His gray eyes, normally dull and distant, were now wide with fear, reflecting the memory of another life, another collapse, another helpless moment when he had knelt beside someone he loved and begged them not to leave him. His breaths came ragged, uneven, his chest tightening, as if some invisible weight pressed on it. The sound of laughter, cruel, sharp, cut through the air. Mason stood a few feet away with Trent and Cooper, their expensive jackets bright against the lifeless winter landscape. Mason's blonde hair fluttered in the cold breeze, and though a flicker of uncertainty flashed across his face, his pride forced his smirk back into place. "It wasn't even that hard," Mason muttered, bumping Trent's arm, as if trying to convince both himself and his friends. Trent shifted awkwardly, his sharp chin lifting defensively. "Yeah, it's just a dog." Cooper, usually the follower, gave a weak laugh that sounded more like a nervous squeak. He looked from Ranger's body to Ethan's trembling hands, and something in his expression wavered, but peer pressure crushed it almost immediately. Ethan didn't hear their excuses. He didn't hear their mockery. He heard only Ranger's shallow wheeze, the same fragile sound he once heard from beneath tons of ruined concrete when another living being had clung to its final breaths and slipped through his fingers. His heart hammered brutally against his ribs. His vision flickered. His throat felt raw. "Not again," he whispered, leaning forward until his forehead almost touched Ranger's muzzle. "Please, not again. Don't make me lose you too." Ranger's brown eyes opened slightly, glassy with pain, and the dog nudged Ethan's knuckles with the tiniest tremor of recognition. Ethan bit down on his lip, fighting a scream lodged deep in his chest. The teenagers fell silent for the first time, unsettled but unsure of what to do. A couple walking their small terrier froze halfway across the field, watching with wide, anxious eyes. A middle-aged jogger, wearing a neon jacket and earbuds dangling from her hand, hesitated, but didn't step closer. People saw everything, yet no one moved. No one dared. No one. Ethan pulled Ranger closer, his arms trembling violently. He wanted to stand shout fight, tear apart the arrogance in the boys' faces, but his body felt locked between horror and heartbreak. Cold crept through his jeans as he knelt on the frost-bitten grass. His jacket, old leather worn down by years of loneliness, barely shielded him from the chill that seeped deeper into his bones. A distant voice broke through the static in his head. At first it sounded like the wind, then like a heartbeat, then like boots pounding the earth. Deputy Cole Harris emerged from the far trail running in long, powerful strides. He was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a clean-shaven jaw and sharp, dark eyes that missed nothing. His breath puffed in white clouds as he sprinted, his navy-blue athletic jacket flapping behind him. Cole was a man known for two things: fairness and a fierce intolerance for cruelty. Before joining the sheriff's office, he'd served as an EMT, witnessing enough pain to know exactly what desperation sounded like. So when he heard Ranger's tortured cry, something inside him snapped into action. Cole's boots thudded across the frozen grass, and his voice boomed out, vibrating through the trees. "Hey, all of you, stop right there!" Mason Trent and Cooper stiffened. Cooper flinched so hard he nearly stumbled backward. Mason's smirk disappeared, completely replaced by dawning fear. "Crap! It's a deputy," Trent whispered, his voice trembling. Cole's sharp gaze took in everything in seconds. Ranger curled on the ground. Ethan's haunted expression, the torn sketchbook, the shaken bystanders, and the three teenagers hovering with guilt plastered across their faces. "Hands where I can see them," Cole barked. Mason obeyed, first raising his hands with a shaky exhale. Trent and Cooper followed, pale and sweating. Then Cole's attention shifted to Ethan, and the storm inside the deputy softened instantly. Ethan looked nothing like the reclusive, strange neighbor people described. He looked like a man, shattered, a man who had lived with ghosts long before this moment. His scarf had slipped from his neck and hung near the ground. His flannel shirt wrinkled beneath his leather jacket as his body hunched over Ranger protectively. His gray eyes were raw, burning with a pain Cole recognized all too well. Sir Cole said more gently, slowing his approach. "Are you hurt?" Ethan didn't look up. "No, he is." His voice was barely audible. Cole knelt beside him, examining Ranger with careful, practiced motions. "Easy, boy," Easy Cole murmured. running a steady hand along the dog's ribs. Ranger whimpered. Ethan flinched at the sound, gripping Ranger's fur like an anchor. "Please, Ethan," whispered, eyes glassy. "Don't let him go, not like—" He stopped, the rest of the sentence lodged behind his teeth. Cole didn't need him to finish. The deputy already understood. "He's still breathing," Cole reassured quietly. "We'll get him help." Then he stood, his gentle expression hardening as he turned to face the boys. His voice dropped into the cold, authoritative tone that made even adults rethink their choices. "What did you three do?" Mason opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Trent took a step back. Cooper stared at his shoes. The silence was damning. Cole stepped toward them, jaw tight. "Nobody moves until I figure out exactly what happened here. Do you understand me?" They nodded shakily. All three teenagers froze where they stood. Behind Cole, Ethan looked down at Ranger again, pressing his forehead to the dog's cheek as if trying to transfer warmth, will, and life into the trembling body beneath him. Don't leave me," he whispered so softly only Ranger could truly hear it. "Not like before. Please, stay." And as the winter wind howled faintly through the trees, the buried wound in Ethan's heart tore open all over again. Thin clouds drifted across the pale afternoon sky, muting the sun, as if even the heavens wanted to lower their voice for what was unfolding on the frosted grass. Deputy Cole Harris knelt again beside Ranger, the aging German shepherd, whose breaths now came in short, jagged bursts. The deputy's gloved hands moved with deliberate care as he examined the dog's chest fingers, pressing gently around the ribs, searching for signs of swelling or fracture. Ethan Cole hovered on the opposite side of Ranger, his body tense and rigid, like a man bracing for an impact he had already endured in another lifetime. The cold stung his cheeks, but the real chill came from inside. Memory chilled. Guilt chilled, the bitter reminder of helplessness chilled. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. He just went for my sketchbook." Then Ranger stood up. "He always stands up for me. And that boy Mason, he kicked him." His words caught on something invisible, and he swallowed hard before continuing. He didn't even hesitate. His gray eyes flicked briefly upward, meeting Cole's steady gaze before dropping back to Ranger. It all happened so fast. Cole kept one hand braced gently against the dog's side. His breathings labored, he murmured half to himself. Likely trauma to the chest. Could be bruising, could be cracked ribs. Ethan flinched as if the diagnosis had been spoken about him. Ranger shifted slightly, releasing a weak whine that cut straight through the thick winter air and deeper into Ethan's marrow. The cry dragged something raw and familiar out of him, something he'd buried under years of silence. He remembered crawling through collapsed concrete, the metallic smell of dust and blood, the frantic search for movement under rubble, and then the silence. The terrible, heavy silence when he realized someone he cared for wasn't breathing anymore. "Not again," Ethan whispered under his breath, voice tight. "Please, not this, not like before." Cole lifted his chin sharply, noticing the tremor in Ethan's tone. "We're not losing him," the deputy said, firm but gentle. The certainty in his voice steadied Ethan just enough to breathe. Around them, several bystanders gathered cautiously at a distance. A woman in her 50s with curly dark hair pressed a hand to her mouth, horrified. A teenage couple stood side by side, both pale. A man in a puffer jacket held his phone, shakily replaying video footage he had captured of the moment Mason's foot struck Ranger. "Deputy," the man called out. "I got the whole thing on camera." Cole rose to his feet, his tall, broad frame casting a shadow over the three trembling boys. Mason's confident posture from earlier had withered entirely. His blonde hair, once perfectly styled, now stuck out awkwardly from where he had run a hand through it, nervously. Trent shifted from foot to foot, biting the edge of his nail. Cooper held his arms across his chest like someone hoping to make himself smaller. Cole's voice dropped low, turning cold enough to frost over stone. "Hand me your phones," he ordered. "All three of you." Mason hesitated for a breath too long. Cole took a step closer, and Mason scrambled to unlock his phone and place it in the deputy's hand. Trent and Cooper followed suit, their hands visibly shaking. "You thought this was funny?" Cole asked quietly, his dark eyes moving from one guilty face to the next. Trent stuttered. We didn't know he'd get hurt." "You kicked a dog." Cole snapped his composure, cracking for just a moment. "And not just any dog." He crouched again beside Ranger, brushing aside the thick fur on the dog's neck until the metal tag hanging from the collar gleamed in the winter light. Cole's eyes narrowed as he read aloud, voice steady, but growing heavier with each word. "Ranger. Urban K9 Unit 12. Service Medal for bravery." His breath caught slightly before he finished. "Jackson Ridge Avalanche Rescue Operation. 4 survivors located." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Ethan bowed his head, pressing his hand to Ranger's shoulder. The memories poured in, Ranger crawling beside him through the collapsed ski lodge dust, clinging to the dog's coat, barking at the exact slab that concealed a trapped hiker. Ranger pushing his nose against Ethan's arm, guiding him toward a child hidden under beams. Ranger refusing to leave until every survivor was carried out. "He saved 4 lives," Ethan whispered, not as pride, but as a confession, because part of him believed the dog had saved his life too. Mason took a step back, eyes rounding in disbelief. "We didn't know," he muttered. "We didn't know he was some hero dog." Cole swung his head toward him sharply. "You didn't need to know. Basic decency shouldn't require a resume." Mason shut his mouth instantly. The deputy pulled out his radio. His voice was steel. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Harris. I'm requesting immediate contact with the guardians of 3 minors involved in an animal assault. Send their details to my unit. Prepare an incident report." Trent let out a panicked exhale. Cooper whispered, "We're dead. Our parents are going to kill us." Cole ignored them, turning back to Ethan. The man was blinking rapidly, trying and failing to steady the storm inside him. His gray eyes had reddened at the edges, both from cold and emotion. "He can't breathe right," Ethan murmured. "It's my fault. I should have stopped them." "This is not your fault," Cole said firmly. "You protected him the best you could. Now I'm doing the rest." Ranger wheezed again, a sound so faint Ethan almost didn't hear it. But when he did, his heart twisted painfully, dragging up the shadowed faces of those he had once lost. Another team member he couldn't save, another collapse he couldn't outrun, another memory that refused to fade. He reached out and cupped Ranger's muzzle in his trembling hand. "Stay with me," Ethan whispered. "Stay." And as Cole stood guard over the scene, teenagers, frozen bystanders, whispering the winter sky, bearing witness. Ethan's gray eyes burned with a mixture of fear, fury, and grief he had spent years trying to bury. Ranger kept breathing, but each breath sounded farther away. The fluorescent lights of the emergency veterinary clinic flickered softly, casting a cold white glow over the sterile room where Ethan Cole sat hunched beside Ranger's treatment table. Outside, the wind rattled the glass panes, and the muted hum of passing cars pressed faintly through the walls, but inside the room, everything was painfully still. Ethan's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of fear and memory. His dark brown hair, usually tied loosely at the back, had fallen forward in disheveled strands. His stubbled jaw looked sharper under the harsh lighting, and the deep lines around his eyes, lines carved by sleepless nights, and years of guilt seemed etched even more deeply. His scarf lay crumpled in his lap, forgotten. His leather jacket hung oddly off one shoulder, as though he no longer had the strength to keep it in place. Ranger lay on a padded metal table, his chest wrapped in temporary gauze, his fur shaved in a small patch where an IV line was inserted. His brown eyes, normally alert and sharp, were half-lidded, clouded with exhaustion and pain. Every shallow breath the dog took seemed to squeeze Ethan's heart in slow, merciless pulses. Ethan rested his hand gently on Ranger's shoulder, feeling the faint warmth beneath the sable fur. "You stay with me, buddy," he whispered, though his voice trembled like something fragile. "You always stay." The door behind him opened quietly, and Deputy Cole Harris stepped in. He had removed his winter jacket, and now wore a fitted navy shirt beneath his duty vest. The overhead lights revealed the hard planes of his face, square jaw, straight nose, tired dark eyes that had seen too much in this world. His short black hair was damp with melted snow. Cole approached slowly as though entering the grief of another man required permission. "The vet says they're stabilizing him," Cole said calmly. "They'll run scans soon. He's strong." Ethan nodded without lifting his gaze. His fingers absently stroked Ranger's fur, the gesture gentle but desperate, like someone clinging to the last rope that kept him from falling into darkness. "I know he's strong," Ethan murmured. "He saved people. He saved me." Cole leaned a hip against the metal counter near them, folding his arms. He studied Ethan not with the scrutiny of a deputy, but with the patience of someone sensing a story buried deep under scar tissue. "You mentioned earlier something about not again, something about losing someone." Ethan's breath faltered. His throat tightened. He sat in silence for several seconds before he finally exhaled the sound torn from inside him, like a long, rusted hinge creaking open. "I wasn't always like this," Ethan began quietly. "Hidden, cut off, trying to disappear." Cole waited without pressing him. Ethan stared at Ranger voice barely louder than the hum of the room. "I was part of the Mountain Urban Rescue Task Force. Back then I wasn't afraid of anything, not storms, not heights, not collapsing buildings." His jaw clenched as old images overtook him. "We got the call late at night. A lodge collapsed during a blizzard. My partner, Luke, he went in with me. We were trained to handle debris shifts, but the storm made everything unstable." Ethan swallowed hard. "We found a trapped woman. Ranger wasn't with us then, he was on another mission. Luke told me to get her out. He stayed behind to stabilize the support beam." His hands shook slightly on Ranger's fur. "I turned my back for maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds. That's all." And the roof gave way. He closed his eyes tightly, fighting the tremor in his voice. "Luke didn't make it. I heard him shout once. And then nothing." The room felt colder as the memory settled. Cole's expression softened, but he didn't interrupt. Ethan let out a long, uneven breath. "After that, I quit. Or maybe I just stopped functioning. I stopped talking to people, stopped showing up anywhere. Felt like I was walking around with someone else's borrowed heartbeat." He looked at Ranger with a fragile, broken fondness. "Ranger found me 2 months later. Literally found me. He crawled into the wreckage of a collapsed cabin when no one else would. They said he sensed something, panic, maybe. Or guilt." Ethan gave a faint, humorless laugh. "When he pulled at my jacket, I thought he was just trying to get out. But he wouldn't leave without me. He dragged me through the debris until the others came." Ethan brushed his fingers along Ranger's paw. "Since then, he's the one thing that kept me here, kept me breathing, gave me a reason to go outside again, even if only to sketch trees." Cole inhaled slowly, absorbing the confession that felt scraped from the deepest parts of Ethan's soul. Ethan Cole said softly, You didn't fail that man. You didn't abandon him. But I lived, Ethan, whispered voice cracking. And Luke didn't. Cole shook his head firmly. Survivor's guilt doesn't mean blame. And what happened today, it's not punishment. It's cruelty from kids who don't understand the weight of their actions. Ethan didn't reply, but the tension in his shoulders shifted, loosening only slightly. Through the window of the door, the waiting area was visible a sterile room with rows of metal chairs. Parents were beginning to arrive. First came a tall man with a heavy-set build and salt and pepper hair wearing a fitted business coat that screamed importance. His face was red from anger or embarrassment, likely both. Behind him entered a slim woman with long blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her red lipstick stark against pale skin. Another couple arrived moments later, a mother with soft brown curls and a worried expression beside a father who looked tired and defeated, his flannel shirt wrinkled. Cole stood straighter. They're here. Ethan's eyes flicked to the glass, his jaw clenched unconsciously. Good, he muttered darkly. Cole gave him a steady look. Stay here with Ranger. Let me handle the rest. Then, with the quiet authority of a man carrying both justice and compassion in equal measure, Deputy Cole stepped through the door into the waiting room, ready to lay out every detail of what their sons had done, evidence in hand, truth, prepared to be spoken without hesitation. Ethan remained by Ranger's side, stroking the dog's fur. And in that bright white room, filled with fear and memory, he realized something. Cole wasn't just fighting for a wounded dog. He was fighting for a wounded man, too. Ranger stirred faintly. Ethan leaned closer, voice breaking into a whisper. I'm right here, buddy. Don't you go anywhere. The night sky hung low over Colorado Springs, a deep blue canvas brushed with thin strokes of silver clouds drifting across the glow of streetlights. Inside the small veterinary recovery room, the world felt quieter than any winter night outside. Still sterile, almost sacred. Ethan Cole sat in a hard plastic chair pulled as close as possible to Ranger's recovery bed. His tall, lean frame seemed folded in on itself, shoulders rounded forward, elbows resting on his knees. His dark brown hair, messy and uncombed after hours of worry, fell partly over his gray eyes, which were rimmed red from exhaustion and emotion. The rugged angles of his face softened under the dim medical lights, and the stubble covering his jaw cast faint shadows across his cheeks. His old leather jacket clung to him like armor he no longer needed, but couldn't yet take off, and the gray wool scarf around his neck lay loosened, drooping, as though fatigued by the weight of the past. Ranger breathed steadily now. His chest, though wrapped in fresh bandages, rose and fell, with a gentleness that had been absent for hours. The sable coat along his back had been brushed, and though his eyes were closed, the faint twitch of his ear showed he was not lost to the world, merely resting. Ethan reached out, placing his hand lightly atop Ranger's head, brushing a thumb behind the dog's ear, where Ranger always enjoyed being scratched. The dog didn't lift his head, but his tail made a small, fragile tap against the padded bed. Ethan's throat tightened. Buddy. His voice cracked into a whisper. Ranger, I'm right here. You hear me? Ranger opened his eyes slowly, the deep brown pools glazed slightly from medication, yet unmistakably present. His gaze drifted toward Ethan, recognizing him, even before the dog fully woke. With tremendous effort, Ranger lifted his head an inch, just enough that Ethan immediately leaned closer, placing his other hand under the dog's cheek to support him. Ranger's tail thumped again, more clearly this time. Ethan bit down on a trembling breath emotion rising like a tide threatening to spill over. There you are, he whispered. There's my boy. The dog gave a weak, huff, warm breath, brushing against Ethan's wrist. Ethan bowed his head, voice trembling. You did it again. You saved me again. Every time I fall apart, you pull me back." He pressed his forehead to Ranger's, and for several long seconds he simply breathed, steadying himself with the same faithful presence that had kept him alive years ago beneath a collapsing world. The door opened quietly, and Deputy Cole Harris stepped inside. He looked tired, dark circles under his sharp eyes, hair still damp from the snow outside, but his posture remained firm. His navy uniform jacket, now back on, carried the faint smell of cold air and worn leather. Cole's gaze softened when he saw Ranger awake, then shifted to Ethan, whose red-rimmed eyes held a fragile glimmer that hadn't existed earlier. "Good to see him looking at you," Cole said quietly. "He gave us a scare." Ethan straightened slightly, wiping a hand quickly across his eyes. "He always comes back," he said, voice rough. "He's tougher than any of us." Cole nodded and pulled a folded document from his vest. "I wanted to give you the final report." Ethan's eyes sharpened with a mix of dread and resolve. Cole continued. The three boys, Mason, Trent, and Cooper, they're being officially entered into juvenile incident files. Permanent records. They'll attend mandatory community service programs and complete animal compassion training. Their families will cover all medical costs. He paused, watching Ethan closely. "There's no buying their way out of this. Not this time." Ethan let out a slow exhale, one that seemed to empty years of bitterness from his lungs. "Thank you," he said simply. The words were quiet, but carried the weight of someone who didn't say them often. Cole gave a slight nod, not a polite dip of the head, but the respectful acknowledgement of one wounded man to another. "You didn't deserve any of this," Cole said, "and Ranger certainly didn't. Justice is the least I could make sure of." Ethan glanced down at Ranger again. The dog's breathing had steadied into a calm rhythm. The edges of Ethan's mouth lifted into a faint, fragile smile. The first genuine smile he had allowed himself in years. A smile that cracked through layers of past winter, like the first sign of spring. He slid his hand gently across Ranger's head, letting his fingers thread through the warm fur. "You're still saving me," Ethan whispered. Ranger blinked slowly, as if answering. The silence between man and dog felt full, not empty, like the silence Ethan used to live in. Full of meaning of connection, of unspoken promises. Cole watched them for a moment longer, then quietly stepped back toward the door. "I'll let you two rest," he said. But Ethan turned slightly. "Cole." The deputy paused. Ethan lifted his gaze, the storm behind his gray eyes now softened with clarity. "Thank you." "Truly." Cole nodded once, firm and sincere. "Take care of each other. That dog's got more fight in him than most people I know." As the door closed behind Cole, Ethan remained seated there, leaning back in the chair with a deep breath that seemed to assemble him piece by piece. He reached for his scarf, adjusting it gently, noticing how his hands no longer shook. His leather jacket, though old and scarred, felt lighter than before, as if some of its burden had lifted. Ranger shuffled slightly, adjusting closer until his head rested against Ethan's boot. Ethan looked down, warmth blooming in his chest. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in many years, Ethan felt the stirrings of something he thought he'd lost forever. The desire to keep living. Ranger, as if sensing this shift, let out a soft sigh, the kind that only comes from deep trust. Ethan brushed the back of his fingers along the dog's cheek. "You pulled me out of the rubble once," he murmured. "And tonight, you pulled me out again." Outside, the wind calmed. Inside, a man who had been lost stepped quietly toward life again, guided not by sermons or second chances, but by the faithful heartbeat of a dog who had never once given up on him. In the quiet moments of life, when the world feels heavy and hope seems distant, God often sends His miracles in forms we least expect, sometimes in the steady heartbeat of a loyal dog, sometimes in the second chance we never believed we deserved. May this story remind you that grace can find us even in our darkest winters, lifting us the way Ranger lifted Ethan. If this touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments past this story to someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more. May God bless and protect every viewer who watches this.